Who's the enemy? It's the Jew, the Jew, the Jew, the Jew, the Jew.
You're listening to the voice of a current State Department employee.
The Jews worship Satan, and they're Satan's own children. Understand who our enemies are. Don't apologize. Never, ever, ever apologize for being white. Never do that. Oh, you can't be racist or sexist or homophobic. Says who?
His name is Fritz Berggren. He's been hosting this podcast and blog called Blood and Faith for nearly 6 years, all while being employed by the federal government. But this is not a story about a secret blog by this State Department employee. It's a story about how the U.S. government, despite numerous complaints, including from members of Congress, is still employing Berggren full-time.
I think there's reason for concern in terms of what that does to our country's image.
Ambassador Eric Rubin has served abroad for this country multiple times and now heads up the organization that represents U.S. Foreign Service officers worldwide. He agreed to sit down with us in his first on-camera interview about Berggren's inflammatory posts.
Should State Department employees be afraid of their safety, for their safety?
I hope not. I think our employees need some assurance that, somebody who thinks they should die, basically, is what he's saying, is not, working among them and potentially putting them at risk.
For nearly 2 years, Scripps News has been speaking to State Department employees about Berggren and reviewing hours of content on his blog. In hundreds of postings, we found he mostly targets Jews. He also degrades people of color, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and the U.S. government.
My opinion of January 6th is that was a fed op. It was a big fat setup.
Zelensky, a Jew. Do you think he gives one rip about the 100,000 white Christians that died in a war with Russia? He's been chosen by his own race, chosen by Satan. Merrick Garland, Mayorkas, Biden family, they married into the Jews.
Now Scripps News has learned these shocking views weren't confined to these blog posts. A former colleague of Berggren's at the U.S. Embassy in Bahrain, where Berggren was once posted, told us Berggren expressed similar sentiments in his time at the embassy. The former colleague agreed to talk with Scripps News on the condition of anonymity. The voice you're about to hear is not that of the employee.
He would always display magazines, very, very pro-right magazines in his office. I know that he was definitely making certain groups of people, especially in the housing community where he lived, he made people feel very uncomfortable.
Ambassador Rubin told us under State Department policy, Foreign Service officers are not supposed to share their political opinions in any public forum, including in their workplace or in a podcast.
You cannot go out and speak publicly. You cannot contradict official policy. We can't work this way. There has to be a clear set of expectations.
But far from being shunned for his inflammatory words, the employee who agreed to speak to us anonymously said Berggren was treated with high regard within the Bahrain embassy.
Do you think they were aware of the comments that he was making in a work setting?
Definitely.
They didn't care to do anything about it.
It was more important to keep the peace.
This colleague says it was after a derogatory comment Berggren made to a black coworker, others were triggered in the embassy to begin to look at his social media accounts. They soon found Berggren's blog, where he'd sometimes file his thoughts multiple times a day while he was serving in Bahrain.
What did you think when you saw or heard about some of these postings?
Disgusted. I'm amazed, absolutely shocked and amazed that someone like that was working for our government, representing our government overseas.
According to a sworn affidavit from a pending EEOC investigation obtained by Scripps News, employees at the Bahrain embassy then complained about Berggren. His boss, Robert Doyle, removed him after the posts came to light, but not before throwing him a virtual goodbye party. These details come from an EEOC retaliation investigation into Doyle's actions at the embassy, including allegations he allowed Berggren's misconduct. We reached out to both Fritz Berggren and Robert Doyle multiple times via phone and email for an interview, but neither responded to our requests. We asked Ambassador Rubin what the rules are for Foreign Service officers while serving abroad when it comes to exercising free speech on personal time, but living on government property.
I have a day job as well, but you sign up to do what I do. And sometimes it's a bit of a challenge.
Berggren posted during the work week, but it is unclear if he posted during the work day.
Is the line blurry in these situations?
I don't think so. We are on duty 24/7 representing our country, and our behavior and our actions reflect on our country. We send people home all the time, basically saying, you have brought disrepute to our country.
Even when you're off the clock, you're still representing the government. And I know that the furniture he used in the blog and in his podcast, like the video, that is U.S. furniture that belongs to the embassy.
And while Berggren was removed from the embassy's staff, he was brought back by the State Department to the U.S. We've learned he spent time working on special immigrant visas given to minority groups from Iraq and Afghanistan, the very people some of his podcasts attacked. Today, he remains a full-time employee of the State Department, working in the Administration Bureau on internal-facing matters. His continuing employment is a subject of major concern for many in the State Department. For the past 3 years, Jewish employees have registered complaints to senior department leaders. More than 70 members of Congress sent a letter to the State Department in 2021, and then this letter again in 2022, urging them to step in. The American Federation of Government Employees sent this letter in 2022, calling Berggren a clear and present danger. Ambassador Rubin says it's puzzling that Berggren has been able to keep his job. The department will not confirm to Scripps News whether his security clearance is still in place.
I don't think a person who is running this blog and this podcast operation should be employed by the people of the United States to represent our country. He may well have his rights as a free citizen of this country to say what he wants, but not to get paid for it by the taxpayers and not to be an official representative of our country.
The State Department declined our request for an interview, but said in a statement, in part, the department views the content on the blog as anti-Semitic, racist, homophobic, xenophobic, and otherwise abhorrent, discriminatory, and inconsistent with the values and mission of the U.S. Department of State. But they told Scripps News the department would not comment on individual personnel matters beyond saying the allegations are being taken seriously.
Never side with a Jew. Never. The biblical definition of treason is siding with the Jews.
For now, Fritz Berggren continues to post on his blog regularly and makes no attempt to hide his disgust for many of the people he is sworn to represent.
You're racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, queerphobic, intolerant, divisive, and anti-Semitic. Yeah, I am. I'm all those things. Proud of it.
Alex Miller joins us live now. Alex, we know there is a hesitation about ideological purges, at government agencies, given the past, communists out, gays out, what have you. But in your piece, you see the unions here who normally support their workers say Berggren just went too far. Why is he still employed?
We don't know. They say, the State Department says that they do take action all the way up to separation when appropriate, but clearly that has not happened. And when I've spoken to experts about this, they say there's probably not a lot of appetite for litigation, that this really could be a free speech issue. But Ambassador Rubin told me that Foreign Service officers have been fired from the State Department for posting much less on social media. And it's unclear how much the State Department knows about the political statements that he has made, either on his podcast or in the workplace. I mean, just recently, Chance, he really goes after the Biden administration, particularly saying that Jews are running America's foreign policy, going after the vice president's husband, Doug Emhoff, who is Jewish, for his role in trying to combat anti-Semitism and working with the administration to do so.
Gosh, yeah. As I was looking for any nuances in the story, like how it said you can't do this stuff abroad. Okay, so if you're posting online, does that count? It's U.S. government furniture. Is that in his private living quarters? Is it in the, there's all these different nuances, but this story really centers on one employee and their actions and the responses to it, or lack of response maybe. But how common, as you look at the State Department, is this sort of behavior?
Well, it's not very common in terms of the level that we're seeing with Fritz Berggren. But when I've talked to State Department employees over the last 2 years, there really is a level of concern. I mean, we've seen vandalism at the State Department, at the embassy in Bulgaria. There was a swastika drawn a couple of years ago. Same thing happened at the State Department headquarters inside of an elevator. Both of those things happened in what's called a secure area, where you need to have a pass to get through or you need to be a guest of someone. So there was never a perpetrator found there. But the fact that this happened, I think, was cause for concern. And when I talked to Ambassador Rubin specifically about this and whether people are really concerned, he says that there are a high number of reports of bullying, of harassment within the State Department, and particularly among the African-American community in these employee service groups like the African-American Foreign Service Officers Association. They have particularly high numbers of harassment and racial discrimination reported.
Wow. This case you profiled, I've never seen anything like that. Never seen a report like this. Alex Miller, deep dive, years in the making. Please keep us posted.